Welcome to Analyst Talk with Jason Elder. It's like coffee with an analyst, or it could be whiskey with an analyst reading a spreadsheet, linking crime events, identifying a series, and getting the latest scoop on association news and training. So please don't beat that analyst and join us as we define the law enforcement analysis profession one episode at a time.
Thank you for joining me. I hope many aspects of your life are progressing. My name is Jason Elder, and today our guest has 4 years of law enforcement analysis experience. He's had quite a career in law enforcement, being a dispatcher, records manager, analyst, and IT consultant. He also is a fellow podcaster, NIRO Knowledge Podcast. He's here to talk about, among other things, IT analyst relationship. Please welcome Nick Roy. Nick, how are we doing?
Good. How are you, Jason?
I am doing very well. How is New Hampshire?
Starting to get cold, surprisingly, in the end of August.
Yeah. I always see all those messages on Facebook about how hot it is and in all parts of the country. And I was like, man, just wait like 3 months. And when you're up north, just wait 3 months and it's a way big difference every 3 months.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's kind of fun to have it that way.
Yeah. So that leaf should be changing here soon, and all the
Probably
tourists
sooner than we expect.
The tourists comes in and everything else.
Add dash from the eclipse, New Hampshire, Vermont.
Yeah. Now, did you get to see that?
I did not. I was actually too busy working at that time. But I had some fun stories about that too, interestingly enough, in regards to vehicles being stuck and stranded on highways.
How were they stuck?
You know those battery-operated Teslas?
Mm-hmm.
When you're not going anywhere for hours on end and stuck in traffic, the battery dies.
Oh, see, I did hear something about that in terms of if somebody was stuck in a traffic jam, but I actually thought that was just a wise tale kind of thing.
I think if it was an inner city thing where there's probably power stations nearby, it would be good. But when you're in northern Vermont, New Hampshire, and stuck on interstates and back roads, heavily congested from all the traffic from all the viewers of the eclipse. It sounds like a few of those Teslas people left running while they were sitting and waiting to move. So a few of them apparently died right there on the highway.
Oh, that's a bummer.
Yeah.
Bummer.
Yeah. Not good for traffic at that point.
Yeah, no, I thought you were going to say something about there was like a solar surge or something like that wiped them out.
That'd be cool too. Maybe it would have given them juice at that point. I don't know.
Yeah. No, I didn't see this solar eclipse, but I saw the one. So it must have been, was it 2016? Whenever it went right through Nashville when I was in Nashville, and it was
awesome.
it was spectacular.
Yeah,
and so somebody already calculated that it's going through Disney World like 2044 or something like that, and so oh my gosh,
that'll be good for them.
Yeah, it'll be a madhouse in that place.
As if it's not already.
Yeah, it's true. All right, we got a lot to get over today.
Let's do it.
Certainly want to get Nick's perspective on a lot of stuff dealing with police departments and analysis and data and security. Get his perspective on his podcast. We are going to have a call-in show. Don't be that analyst. Get in your calls if you have a don't be that analyst. All right. So let's just start from the beginning, Nick. How did you discover the law enforcement analysis profession?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I kind of started way back in the day thinking I wanted to be a police officer. And so got my my bachelor's degree and moved forward. Didn't get into law enforcement, started dispatching, and then landed a records manager position at the Ringe Police Department here in New Hampshire. I was in that position and actually getting my master's degree as well for criminal justice, and with Boston University, go Terriers.
Nice.
So I don't even remember exactly what triggered it, but I had seen something in regards to analysis, and I'm like, oh, yeah, why wouldn't that be a better way to figure out some of the solutions, right? To be a little more effective and efficient in law enforcement practices by finding out what's going on, where the problems lie, and what's the best action to take to better resolve some of these ongoing issues, no matter what they are. Everybody's department has something a little different to deal with, right? So I actually then had met Carol Fitzgerald, who was working at Leominster, Massachusetts Police Department at that time, and found out about MACA, the Massachusetts Crime Analyst organization, joined up in that, and it was kind of just off and running from there with everything I had hoped it would be at that point. It was basically pulling the numbers, seeing what there was, patterns, all the fun stuff that us analysts end up doing at that point. So yeah, it was really when I got to that job in Ringe and was able to meet Carol and join MACA that I really wrapped my head around what that position entailed.
Yeah. But up to that point, you had been a dispatcher at the police department since 2009.
Yes. So I actually was a dispatcher for Cheshire County Sheriff's Department. So we did the county, Cheshire County for New Hampshire, who did everything but one of the cities in the county and state police. So we handled a little over 20 police departments exclusively. So I know some dispatch offices end up doing all three emergency services. We just were strictly law enforcement. So we took the 911 calls, we took the calls of people locked out of their homes and that kind of stuff too. So the whole gambit at that point.
Yeah. So do you have any wild dispatch stories?
I don't even. So what I experienced there was any number of fun craziness, from 911 calls that ended up being because people's power were out it wasn't something where it was anything crazy like snowstorms or electrical storms that were going on, right? The power is out and they call in 911 because they want to know why their power's out. I'm not sure what bucket truck I've seen in any law enforcement agency that deals with electrical utilities, but I guess we were the ones to call for that. I get it, though. I mean, I can't really fault somebody for doing that because usually I think our go-to is the police have all the information, right, in some form. I remember taking a 911 call where a couple times I thought the guy had died on me, trying to speak to them, but those long pauses. So, I mean, there were definitely a few of those, like the old phone calls. There are probably some, I'm sure, that are on YouTube, which I've never wanted to look up because I experienced them enough myself.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's definitely a few. Still, one of, I think, my favorite memories there was we would do Track Santa. So during his travels, we would get reports and kind of let the officers know of what was being seen by our callers. Mm-hmm. And before there was the digital radios, there was analog, so there's no ability to see who had keyed in on the mic to say certain things. But as my dispatcher I was with at the time, my partner, had put out, I forget exactly what it was, but where he was and what Santa was up to, somebody had keyed in on the mic and asked the ever famous question that still burns in my mind: "Are you serious, Clark?" So I was on the floor laughing hysterically at that point. Unfortunately, my partner had never seen the movie, so he did not understand what I was laughing at. It's like, dude, you missed out. That was an epically perfect retort at that point that you can never do nowadays because you will get found out.
Oh, man. I actually have a t-shirt that says that.
Awesome.
Yes.
That's awesome.
So I am well aware of that line in the movie. So then you get into records manager.
Yep.
And I guess at that point in time, what was the reason for the transition?
Yeah, actually, surprisingly, it was because of the time frame. So I had kids who were getting older at that point, and my dispatch schedule was an 18 to 04 shift. So I was kind of working overnight. So really trying to get to any school stuff for the kids was almost out of the question at that stage. And the records manager position, geez, I'm crow, was more like a 7 to 3, 8 to 4 kind of thing. So it left me available for those extracurriculars that the kids were involved in. As I got there, I was able to perform those duties and had some extra time. I was like, well, how do I maximize this, right, at that stage? And when I came across that analyst realm, that's when I just started sinking my teeth into it.
So the records management position, you're not trained in IT at this point, or
IT
anything
or
like
data
that,
or anything.
data
No.
or anything like that. So, I mean, is that just self-taught? Had you already been like a techie most of your life, and it just came naturally, this idea
Yeah.
of managing these records?
Yeah, never went to school for it. It was for IT stuff, but yeah, always something I was involved with and hands-on. I mean, we had a computer when I was growing up, and to age myself, it was mid to late 80s having a
Hmm.
computer in the house.
Yeah.
Definitely different than what people see today. So I suggest people go back and see what that's like, putting 13 disks into a machine to get something to actually run.
Big those I remember those big discs that were
Oh yeah,
like
yeah.
like LP size
Five
discs
inch
that you
discs and
said.
everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, some of the bigger ones. Oh my God. Yeah. So always had a knack for technology and being
Hmm.
able to see, at least on the surface level, what was there, what was going on. I wasn't too afraid of breaking something,
Hmm.
but dabbled enough to know enough to cause some trouble. So a good self learner, I guess.
Hmm.
Self learner, self taught. Yeah, either
Yeah.
or, both maybe. So doing some of that records management was a pretty easy process in a smaller town in
Hmm.
terms of what was required, what they were looking for. Some of it also unfortunately ends up being redacting for the public requests for
Hmm.
documentation as well as necessary. Keeping on top of things with the court and communicating with the states. It's not as if it's put your feet up kind of job,
Hmm.
but what it requires wasn't a lot of specific knowledge into any certain aspect at that point. So,
I've talked to folks that were records managers after they were analysts. It was like
mm,
they promoted into a position where they were analyst supervisor and records manager. In terms of your mindset, as you mentioned, that you started asking around, you discovered analysis,
mhm,
and you got linked in with MACA. And so you come to MACA and come to the conversation of law enforcement analysis with not only a dispatcher background, but you also come there with that records management
yep.
background, which I think is a unique perspective to have.
Yeah, I mean, because you get your hands on a lot of the stuff that's already ongoing, some of the cases you're talking already with the officers, because especially in the smaller department I was in,
Mhm.
knowing the things that they needed, the stuff that needed to be in the file, and understanding, I think, a bit more of what their mentality is and what they're working on, how their thought process is built, especially since in New Hampshire, there's only one academy that's done for the entire state. So I would suppose that at that stage, what you're getting is, it sounds bad in some form, but lack of a better term, like that cookie cutter aspect. So everybody's mentality is probably pretty well shared based on how they train officers. Obviously, as they go out to their different departments, there's going to be site specific aspects that they're going to have to know and learn. But for the most part, you're understanding at that stage what's going on if you're paying attention to, which is always huge, personally, interacting with people, right? So, yeah, it kind of gave me a gauge as to what was important, what their struggles were
Hmm.
sometimes too with using the record system that we had. And so for me, again, with some of that free time in a sense, how do I make that better? How do I refine that? How do I get them to be more efficient and effective for their workload, right?
Hmm.
So that way, at that point, what are they doing? They're actually being even better for the public at that stage.
Yeah. I think it's fascinating talking with analysts that from a really small town and what they can accomplish. You talked about free time. We're talking about MACA, so I think I'm obligated to talk about Christopher Bruce.
Yep.
And he talks about reading every single police report every day, and
Yeah.
even on Monday, reading everything from the weekend. So you're in this position as a records manager, so you have this little bit of free time to actually start building data sets, building out reports, and getting the officers data
Yeah.
for that. So you're the whole entire spectrum of the data process.
Yeah, yeah, and so it kind of started more. I mean, we had a very involved public in that town, and so as everybody is aware, there's always that question of law enforcement and budget. So one of the things in my goal too, was also to make sure that the public was informed. So how do I do that as well as help the officers? And it was kind of a little more building on the front end originally, get stuff going for the public. How do I pull, first of all, as we all know, how do I access this data and like pull it forward to be usable? And so that's what I had to start with and build with. And I taught myself how to use Microsoft Access and got really I would say pretty well in depth for somebody who was just a novice in some form. But apparently, as I brought it to MACA, I had a couple of people like, "Oh wow, you did that? What do you mean?" I was like, "Isn't this what all of you do? Isn't that what data analysts do? Is build their own database and put together their stuff for themselves and their department?" Like, absolutely not. Basically, is what I got from most people. So it's like, oh damn, all right. But
another guy does that. Another gal does that. We don't do that.
Yeah, right. And so it was interesting. I was kind of, I guess, an analyst, like a whole. I felt like, I guess, if it was something like Miami, right, and I was the entire analyst team, I was the person who was building the database and pulling the data and cleaning the data and doing this. Like, damn, it's like a one-stop shop somehow to get all of this done. So, but yeah, it ended up being me pulling forward the data and getting it for the public and the police to inform people, so that way we didn't have as many inquiries at that point, because people could see it front facing eventually for the public, and then again giving that availability for the officers to spend more time doing what they need to do and servicing the public.
So this gets into your analyst badge story, and for those that may be new to the show, the analyst badge story is the career-defining case or project that an analyst works. So we're at this time, you're getting into dashboards, Power BI, and just leveraging this data for the public.
Yeah, so as again, being a small department and limited on budget, time again was something that the department could give me. So I was able to go and get training in all the free training I could find, in a sense, which wasn't unfortunately too much. So what I ended up doing was realizing that I didn't have the analyst notebook program. I didn't have ArcGIS. I didn't have so many different software programs that kind of a lot of bigger department analysts would leverage to help their officers and help the public with information. So as I was building the database, it's like, well, all right, cool. People are using dashboards. Like, how do we tell a story from this data? How do we let people know what's going on and kind of show them this information at the very least, and they can digest it themselves? Because numbers are great, but obviously, as we know, most of the time it's easier to digest the visual aspect of it. So I had found that Microsoft was, and I don't even remember how old Power BI was at that time, found that they had Power BI and that it could do these dashboards, which was great. I remember also going to IACA in Virginia, I believe it was, Maryland, at one point in time, and going to, I think it was Jason Elder's little thing about Excel and dashboards and stuff. And
you're making me blush.
So I was like, damn, this is something I need to do. So like I said, found Power BI, got that in place, and realized I could pull the data through and start building dashboards. And surprisingly enough, I was able to find it's actually still online. Nice. Hasn't been refreshed since about 2021, 2022, when I had gone per diem with the department, but it's actually still there. So I've got data in there, it looks like from 2016, and just like a small smidgen of numbers from 2022, but it's got our calls for service, how they were being tracked at that point in time, accidents, our arrest data, as well as offense data. So you can see what crimes were charged, or how many cases there were versus the crimes, and that kind of information that's broken down. And thankfully it's interactive too, so if you end up clicking on I think one of the dashboards has the arrest data, and you can click on arrest by gender, so you can see all of the information at that point based on male versus female, and see what each half of the gender was up to and range depending on what year you picked to and stuff. So, but yeah, it was a fun little thing to kind of put together and see that, I guess in a sense, a lot of my learning experiences have always been, as I like to call it, MacGyver school of. So it's a build it yourself aspect as opposed to leveraging or being capable of leveraging something that costs money. So it's definitely out there for any analyst to get a hold of. It's just a matter of, unfortunately, putting in the time to learn it and then build it yourself. And I think people with the drive to do it can do the same thing.
Yeah, and I think that's the point, the drive to have it. And you
Yeah.
definitely, I do have to say, you're definitely aging yourself with MacGyver, Prince.
Wait, there
Uh,
was a reboot. What are you talking
there,
about?
I know there
I
was
called it
not.
80s earlier,
There was
but
not a reboot. It
oh,
does
okay.
not exist.
I don't blame you. I
Yeah,
couldn't do it
no,
without Richard Dean
no,
Anderson.
that you're basically MacGyver was a big part of my childhood,
I
so
love it.
I have near and dear to my heart type of thing.
So great. Swiss Army
So
knife. That's where that
yeah,
became
so
famous.
but to your point, I am always impressed to hear what analysts do DIY,
Yeah,
right?
right.
And this idea of just creating this product yourself. Because what my frustration when I was an analyst, it seemed like I could only get so far with my skills, ability, and access.
Hmm.
And from your vantage point, I mean, just envisioning you working like, hey, you records management, so everything behind the curtain on the back end.
Right.
And obviously, you learn the Power BI, you learn the actual reporting product,
Yep.
but then you also had to learn the idea of putting it out there on the web, which
Yes.
is another thing that I struggled with when I was an analyst. So there's lots of things that you're learning to get it from that. Again, you're the whole show, you're the whole data process from just the crunch, the managing of the number, the data all the way to the
Yep.
final report.
Yeah, that's it. It's I suppose at that point when you're focused, you're in that zone, right? I forget even what they call it, but basically it being in that aspect, it's almost as if it's learning enough so that 20% to get the 80%, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's truly a lot of what it was. And thankfully, the web had been around enough, so any little small roadblocks I ran into was able to find that answer through a few web searches. Not really a lot of video to show you how to do some things, but if you can read, I guess you could get it done. Some of those little bits of information, especially for Microsoft Access, which isn't leveraged a lot in these more modern times. I mean, I was reading stuff from like 2007 to answer questions. Like, dang, all right, well, that's good to know.
Yeah,
Still
yeah.
works.
Yeah, I'm always laughing when I come across the forum online. It's from 2007 or something like that.
Still there.
Yeah,
Still there.
yeah. I was like, oh, yeah, that's getting up there now.
Right?
So, all right, well, excellent. So let's move into your podcast. As I mentioned in your intro, you had a podcast, NIRO Knowledge,
I did.
and
Yep.
that ran from 2020 to 2021. So you actually started publishing podcasts before I started publishing podcasts. So I'm curious to know where this idea to create a podcast came from and just that genesis.
Yeah. So I had started, and I'll give the shout out again. Carol Fitzgerald of MACA fame. She was kind of my cheerleader in my corner for a bit. So as I learned Access, and she was one of the first ones I brought it to. I'm like, oh, I did this. She's like, that's great. How'd you do it? It's like, what do you mean? She goes, yeah, I don't do that. What do you? So I was like, what are you talking about? And then she, as MACA was coming around for a conference, she's like, "Oh yeah, you should put in and like teach some access stuff." Everybody's always looking for that. I was like, "What? What are you talking about? I don't know enough about that." So I had that little delusion at that stage that I couldn't show somebody anything because everybody else already knows that kind of stuff as we do. But so as I was in MACA, some of that started happening where it was an exchange of information and sharing things back and forth. And then I found out about what I call IACA, which is the international Association. So I started realizing that there was all these other groups out there. There's all this other information out there. And I was starting to get into this teaching realm in some form for Access and Power BI a little bit, and helping people out with that information when they had questions as well. So it's like, what else do people need? Like, what's missing? And podcasts were kind of, I think, starting to hit their stride a bit more. And so I was like, well, is there any crime analysis podcast? Because I'd love to consume more information. I'm always looking for more knowledge, anything that I might be able to find to put in my either my skill set or take somebody's experience right at that point and learn from it. So I was like, well, why don't we do that? Why that would be kind of good. So figured out how to another piece of learning it yourself, figure out how to kind of piece that together. I'm like, all right, so I just need to record audio. Where do I host it? Had a buddy who was already dabbling, asked him about it, and then just I got lucky in terms of having people around me who were already getting going, and then just really got super lucky after going to that IACA conference and seeing your training. One of the keynote speakers there was Dr. Laura Huey. I was like, can I swear on this?
Sure.
I was like, fuck it. I'm going to ask her. Like, why not? Right. So because she had captivated that entire audience, which was easily over 100, I was like, I'll ask her. Let's see if she will be my first podcast. She agreed right away. So it was fantastic. And I'm like, all right, this is like a pinnacle moment in a sense, like the stars are aligning and let's just do this. And so I just hit it, did it, got her on. We did the podcast, and thankfully at that stage I had a few other people lined up, but I continued, as the struggle is real in a sense, continue to try and get people to be on the show. But I didn't really want to have people miss an episode. Like I didn't want to go a few weeks without one. So I would just record thoughts and notes and whatever for the podcast and post that out. But I really wanted, since it was going to be educational, people from more of an academia standpoint, because as we know, there's a lot of research that's out there that hasn't really made a big public impact sometimes. And I felt that was necessary because I think as analysts, we can kind of drive where law enforcement can go in terms of what's the better means of dealing with either the situation, the crime, the community. There's a lot of different levels to it, and I think it can provide some information in that realm. So that's why I was trying to gear more towards that aspect as opposed to the analysts themselves, just something above and beyond to maybe give, again, like I like to do, give some sort of perspective, a little extra piece of knowledge, or learn from somebody else's experience, and then take it back home. How do we work that? How do we incorporate that to make our department better?
So do you think back now about those beginning episodes and think about listening to them, and maybe yours was all the same quality, but I know like my first like 5 or 10 episodes, man, I almost don't want to go back and listen to them because
Does it make you
I
cringe?
was just, yes, because I just, and there's one in particular for me, Carolyn Cassidy, like I just edited the hell out of that podcast, and it just sounds oh man, it just did not sound right at all. So I definitely owe Carolyn Cassidy a redo someday. But do you have that? Is it, when you look back at those first couple episodes, what do you think about?
Yeah, no, I actually still like them. It was probably one of the ways I took it, and how you and I had differed in some form is that mine were straight out. So how it played out, there is no edit for anybody at that point. So I knew I had to get it right out of the gate. I knew that danger was in there already. So, I mean, we would preface it, and there's a few times, I think even the second episode I had with Dr. Laura Huey was, there were a few more dogs barking in it. So she's like, I got the dogs. And all of a sudden you hear them barking. I'm like, oh, hey, that's fine. We'll keep rolling. It's fine.
Yeah.
It's all good. We'll do what we need to. But I felt it gave people that aspect of if they're there in the audience kind of thing, right? It's a moment of sitting down, having coffee with somebody, and just maybe even you're an analyst at the cafe and you're just overhearing the conversation, even if it's something you just played in the background, right? So yeah, thankfully I haven't heard any that make me hesitate outside of the ones I had to do solo because there was nobody I had interviewed at the time to release it at my quote unquote scheduled release date time. So
Yeah.
those are
That,
cringeworthy.
do you have either it's like your favorite child, I guess, but I mean, do you have a favorite, or do you have one that really comes to mind that it was like the message was there, like the stars aligned, and you thought, man, this is one of my best episodes?
Yeah, really. Again, I vibed well with Dr. Laura Huey. And I could say with all of them, it really was something to take away. I had a couple other people from Canada had come on from that organization in order to talk about what their specialties were. I had, oh man, there's so many other good ones thrown in there. I had Dr. Peter Langman had come on. He's somebody who had spoken to, I believe it was at MACA at one point. He's the one that talks about his specialty is school shooters, and I think he had started doing within like the last 10 years maybe, studying mass shooters, and not people from Massachusetts who are shooters, but the people like the Las Vegas concert shooting, that kind of aspect at that stage. So it was great because it had those people on to talk about their specialties, and we were always able to glean some stuff from it. And it was always, again, geared towards what I felt was something that the analysts who were listening could pull something away from, whether they're a small town analyst like I was, or from someone from a bigger town. I mean, we went over things like mapping. We talked to people who were running a larger analyst community. We spoke on environmental and organizational influences that are on officer behaviors. It was a broad spectrum. So it's tough to really pick one outside of, again, Laura, because she was my first, and it felt like it was the white whale thing, but I got it right away.
Nice.
Yeah.
Now, NIRO, obviously, first initials of your first and last name, but is it up to that point, had you gone by NIRO, or is that something that just came with the podcast?
It came with the podcast. I'm like, how do I just what do I call it? And for whatever reason, that actually got plucked somehow from the ether, and I was like, NIRO, that sounds good. Let's do it. Sounds short enough. It can be said by people pretty quickly. Oh, have you heard the NIRO podcast? If it was the case, I don't know if I was on everybody's lips like that necessarily, but
isn't there I don't think it's spelled the same, but isn't there a Roman war
like
hero or something like that? Yeah, Nero. I was really hoping that you had, like, it's been your nickname and you have this gigantic back tattoo of Nero.
No. No, maybe I should look into that now, though. I don't know. No, yeah, he was Nero. I do remember from, oh God, must have been like high school, but NERO, I believe it was like a Roman emperor of some kind. Not sure his claim to fame, but yeah, somebody that got studied in high school kind of thing. Yeah.
Looking to automate mundane tasks? What crime analyst isn't? I highly recommend Data Science for Crime Analysis with Python, written by Dr. Andrew Wheeler. And as a bonus, enter promo code LEAP, L-E-A-P, to get it $10 off either an ebook or paperback. Go to www.crimedecoder.com/store. That's Crime Decoder, CRIME-CODER.com. Again, enter promo code LEAP, L-E-A-P, for a $10 off coupon.
Hi, I'm Kyle Stoker, and I'm encouraging you to vote in the IACA elections. You have the opportunity to vote for your candidate. So make sure you go to the IACA website and vote, because our membership has a voice in who leads the organization, and you want to make sure that your voice is heard. Thank you.
So now you're an IT consultant. And
Yes.
again, there's lots of different perspectives to your career, because now you worked in a lot of small towns, police departments, whether it's a dispatcher, records management manager, and now you're helping out some of these small agencies with some of their IT practices.
Yeah, so I joined my employer's company. He actually was the contracted IT for the town at the time, so that's how I got to know him.
Mm-hmm.
And we worked well together, and because I was capable of kind of like following his instruction, I guess you can say, in terms of, it's like, hey, this isn't working, and I tried this, but this, which I probably suspect that he wasn't used to, was somebody going through the steps that they had already done to get something back up and running. So he's like, oh, try doing this. And I was like, okay, I'll give you a call back if I have a problem. After doing that a few times and never having to call him back, I believe he anticipated that I knew what he was talking about without him having to go, okay, click on this, go to this place, do that thing, right click on that, right? And go through those kind of walkthroughs. So at some point, a couple years into the contract, he had been saying to me every once in a while, he's like, someday I'm going to hire you. Someday you'll work for me. Someday. It's like, okay. And that someday came along.
Yeah.
And so he made me, as they like to say, an offer I couldn't refuse.
Nice.
So yeah, I've been with him ever since I was about 2021 that I got started getting into the IT world and slowly grew into his business, into what I'm doing today, which is a lot of help desk work and making sure that our clients are taken care of, some site visits, and the problems that they have we can address. But one of the benefits I think that we've seen is that coming from a police department, especially in New Hampshire, who almost all police departments leverage the same records program, and me understanding that program, having worked with it for well over a decade, because we actually use that as well in the dispatch center. That comes with a lot of, I guess, clout in some form, as you can say, understanding the frustrations out of the gate that come with that program. So yeah, it's been pretty great.
So from your vantage point, as you've been working with all these police departments, do you feel that for the most part, these police departments are in good shape? You would give them a healthy rating in terms of their cybersecurity, where they're at, their capabilities, or is it a situation where it's kind of average and there's plenty of room to grow yet?
Yeah, I guess I'll speak more global because I won't talk about about clients at that point. But in terms of police departments and cybersecurity realm, in that aspect, I think it's not just, in all of my experiences, it's not just municipalities that struggle with protection. I mean, we see it obviously in the news a lot of the time too, with cybersecurity breaches across the board, places that we believe too that are well protected. And one of the things is it's more a matter of when, right? It's not a matter of if anymore, because there's so much that people do and work with, and you're working with people. A lot of the data still shows that people are getting in via emails. There's going to be no way to change that. So when somebody's sitting down in front of the computer and sees an email and clicks on that link, somehow they've either launched something into the computer, into the network, launched a web browser, and then put in credentials. There's no very small variation on different ways that these people have started figuring out getting into these systems. So again, a lot of it, no matter how many levels of security and protection you have, somebody finds the hole. It's tough. It's definitely tough when you have more restrictions. I think we can all agree to that, but there's a lot that can still be done for a lot of places. Some of it can be cost effective, and unfortunately some of it is not cost effective, especially when you're dealing with places that are stuck in terms of budget restraints. So yeah, it's out there. We should never expect that it's going to be anything less, unfortunately. Now I guess the question is, how do the police end up operating with this at this point in time, because people are losing money at that point, sometimes in terms of obviously the ransomware. Not just what does IT have to do at that stage if you are infected, if you are hit with ransomware, if your network goes down because of however big that impact is at that point from that starting point. But then how is law enforcement addressing the crime at that stage? Because as we all know, most of these people are not in this country.
Yeah.
So,
and it's interesting. As you were talking there, I just quickly Googled police department cyber attack. And you have Dallas, New Jersey, San Bernardino, Canadian Royal Police Department. They're just they all got hit with ransomware. And this headline actually from LA Times said San Bernardino sheriffs paid $1 million.
Right.
So
that's the interesting part, because you can usually talk to business owners, right? People who understand, I guess, money, if you want to call it that, in terms of knowing that what is the value of the protection versus having to pay out a ransom, right? How long would your protection, and when I see that headline, that's my question in my brain as somebody who is somewhat dabbling in small business on my own side, is how do you decide that the cost of potentially, and it doesn't mean that this would not have happened, but protecting yourself, however your systems are set up, and however your IT professionals had said, this is what we need in place, and you said, well, we don't have the budget for it. Where did the budget for the $1 million come from? And obviously that's from insurance, but now your insurance has gone up. So what would have been covered with $1 million to hopefully prevent this aspect? And a lot of it, I mean, comes down to user training at that point, because again, it's still 90% plus of these problems come via email almost nowadays. So,
and you mentioned that, and I'm going to show my age here. When I was in college in the 90s, on campus, if the phone rang once, if there was just one ring to the phone, it was an on-campus call. And if it was two separate rings, it was off campus.
Okay.
And that's how it was on campus. And my point to all of that is, it seems to me, if it's email has the department the biggest soft spot, then why not keep all in-house emails in-house, and then have a special flag for those that are coming from the outside in, and that so somebody can easily see, because I see them at my work a lot, and they really do get better. And I just actually found out that our IT department actually has created some of them to make sure that we're just not willy-nilly clicking on stuff. And my coworker clicked on one, and then he had to go to sensitivity training, whatever it was, right? Because he clicked on it. But
the phishing emails.
The phishing emails, but they are getting better and better and better. So it just seems to me that something to just say, like, okay, can we segregate that in a way to protect the whole entire organization, email, given the email is one of the biggest threats.
So there's filters in place, there's tagging that can be done, there's a lot that gets done with filters. I mean, there are filters that are built with AI in them, so they kind of do a little bit more than make sure that there's no viruses. If there's a virus, it's not getting through. Like, that's almost base for a lot of filters nowadays. However, I mean, if there's a link in there, that's going to be a problem. There's unfortunately fileless malware, and that ends up being an issue. I mean, you don't even have to open the email, and you just have to open the email. You don't have to click on anything at that point. Just opening it to read it is enough. Yeah, so again, like there's no shortage of different ways that they try to maneuver. One of the big things too is and I mean, this even goes back to the 90s when email was around, but when people had their email accounts taken over in a sense, right? It's like
Mm-hmm.
so all of a sudden, all of the contacts in that person's email account get something like, oh, hey, this will make you smile. Click this link. And it's from your friend's email. It's not a
Yeah.
spoofed email account, right? So somebody
Yeah.
had been compromised, but now because it's something that we trust goes out to all of these people, and how many people clicked that link. So now we've helped perpetuate that scam, because now they're in our email. All of our contacts got something with the same thing, right? So it can, yeah, the diligence still unfortunately is on, I guess you could say unfortunately, it's really always in a sense our own responsibility to just see and make sure. And thankfully we've had some very diligent clients where they've seen an email and go and actually called the person because it was legitimate, but they're like, hey, you sent me this PDF file. Like, it wasn't me. So it had come from the outside, people that they have dealt with in the past. So it was a legitimate email, but not sent from the account owner at that point, right? So thankfully, I mean, they let us know. They said it was going around. We passed it out to make sure people are updated, and it's just making sure people are informed at that stage, because it's always a matter, in a sense, of when and how long can you stave it off. And
Mm-hmm.
do you have things in place, really, in a sense, to really minimize the impact? As there are some programs that do that. I mean, you can, if a computer is infected, you can actually seclude it from the network if you have proper programs on there to do so. So that way it doesn't perpetuate into the rest of the devices on the network. So there's a lot of different aspects to security. So this could be an all-day topic, obviously.
Yeah. Yeah. So I do want to move on
Yeah.
slightly, because
Yeah.
I do want to talk a little bit about IT analyst relations.
Sure.
And if you've listened to me talk, or even at conferences, I've told the story of IT department being the party of no,
Yeah.
and what I have referred to them as FIT, which is fucking IT and frustration. So again, I think your perspective is a valuable one here, given your background, given what you're doing now. Obviously, from the analyst perspective, they're trying to do a task and they feel handcuffed
Yep.
because of IT.
Yeah, I guess really the piece of that, knowing a little bit more of what I know now, being in the IT field and having heard some of those stories before too at conferences, I never had the problem in one department over the other. One department I had worked with previously, and I won't say which one was which, but there was a computer where you move the mouse and the thing shot across the screen. So trying to click one of the little check boxes was tough. So it was like, oh, well, I know how to change the mouse sensitivity. Let's do it. And it was grayed out. You could not do it.
Yeah.
And so that was the level of lockdown. So I can totally understand that frustration in regards to basically not being allowed to get done what you need to get done. I think it just, and I don't know most people's interaction with IT. Sometimes it can be like, yeah, I see him once a year and couldn't tell you what the guy's doing in a sense, but maybe he's got other projects going on. And then sometimes there's people you see all of the time. What kind of relationship can you set up with them in a sense? And I always feel that it's better to ask the questions and probably pitch them what it is you're trying to do, because they can hopefully come to a resolution for you. In terms of your computer being locked down, like Windows is, you are either restricted as a user or you have local admin rights, which means you can basically do anything you want on the computer. And that's tough, because when you give somebody that freedom, if you click that link, let's say, and that you didn't realize and it didn't do anything, you're like, oh, that's weird, nothing happened. Well, somebody could be on your machine in a sense at that point and be capable of creating their own local admin account, start doing things, right? So there's as a user, you can't do that.
Yeah. So
you can't escalate the privilege in a sense.
Yeah, because I think that's admin rights does come up a lot.
Yep.
And in my day, it was trying to be creative. I knew I had limited resources, whether it was budget, whether it
Yep.
was IT's time. My little roadblock wasn't big enough to get anybody's attention. But in terms of my world as an analyst, I'm like, man, it would be a lot easier if I could come up with a way to either automate this or make it easier.
Right.
And so again, I would get into kind of your realm of DIY. Is there something out there that I can handle? Is there a freeware? Is there something there
Right.
that I can explore to make my life easier?
Yep.
Not having admin rights is really a handcuff if you're trying to do something like that. So
Yeah.
from my vantage point, it was just really frustrating. Certainly understanding the risk, but at the same time, me trying to be more efficient at my job.
Yeah, that's really what it is. Like, it's a battle of efficiency in a sense, right? At that point.
Mhm.
And a couple of things that can roll out of that is, again, can you have that conversation with the IT, and whether it's the entire department or you can thankfully focus on one technician if it's one of a larger department, and try to figure a resolution. Because while they can be a roadblock, they can also be somebody, that's what they're there for, like solve an IT issue. Might not be high priority, which can definitely suck when you're trying to get something done as an analyst, and know that potentially that program you can download and test out, it must have the feature that you need in order to tweak the data just right or whatever. Especially, as you said, when you're kind of DIYing it yourself at that point. But one of the pieces too is that programs can be turned on to run. I know some programs have an issue with it being a user account, so you can have the program itself on your computer run with administrative privileges. So there's a piece for everybody to have a conversation, how all IT departments across the across the globe at this point, like, wait, can we run this program with admin privileges so I can get this done now and you can keep my computer locked down? Like, no, just ask them for a resolution. They'll work with you, I'm sure. But that could be one of the solves.
All right. So I'm going to put an idea in your head. So in case you get time on your hands and you want a new endeavor.
Sure.
And a police department IT association.
Right. I love that.
Yeah. To work with there's 17,000 police departments. Now, as you just told us, not everybody has an IT department at their police department, but there's still plenty out there. And the IT being such an integral part of not only police departments, everybody's life. Yeah. I think it comes with the police department. IT comes from a unique perspective and a unique set of needs. And it would be interesting to have collaboration and best practices and that training as all across the country dealing with similar threats, right? So
absolutely. I mean, you can definitely take a lot from federal government. Definitely puts out some information in terms of what they see and what they have for compliance as different framework, right? But then you have to wrap it into CJIS as well and their level of compliance for police departments. So there's definitely a lot to work with there for sure.
All right. Well, if you do end up creating it, I get lifetime membership.
Absolutely.
That's my price.
Absolutely.
All right. All right, let's get into some advice for our listeners, whether that's new analyst, experienced analyst, whether you're talking about just things they can do now or things they can study for the future. What advice do you have for us?
Yeah, I mean, really, that's kind of tough. I guess I've always been the one-man show, the self-reliant one in a sense, based on just area. But even if you don't have the department you're working with, if you're doing records management, you want to do analysis, take it and run with it. Really, I mean, if it's going to get you in trouble in terms of what you're trying to access, probably ask first, but definitely grab it by the horns and go, because I was able to do that and get a lot of stuff done in a small town that I saw around me that some of the bigger towns were doing. And while we didn't have the level of crime necessarily that other people did to deal with, we were still able to pull things forward, answer questions for the public more efficiently and effectively, and kind of give the officers what they needed. So it's a little bit more of a if that's what you want to do, believe in it and run with it.
Do you have a master's degree?
Yep.
Looking back on it now, was it a good return on investment?
So because I severely diverted from continuing from the analysis aspect, not necessarily. However, would I do it again? Yes. I probably, yeah, that's a fantastic question, Jason. Yeah. I just always love learning, I guess, is really what it is. And I wouldn't change it. Like, I enjoyed what I was doing. I liked what I picked up on. Was it worth the cost? Yeah, I guess to a degree, really, because some of that I'm actually leveraging a little bit now in what I do with IT stuff. I mean, it's a different realm in some form, but there's data to pull still, and I'm trying to figure out how to tell the story. And the master's degree was really another means to stay in analysis, but possibly get somewhere into a bigger department that had required a master's degree. So I was preparing for a future in analysis at that point. So I would say it's worth it. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. You're right. It's not a straightforward answer. I feel that what you get out of it is one thing, obviously. Anytime you're talking about return on investment, what are you getting out of it versus what you spent for it?
Right.
And if you use it, it's worth it, right? And I think that there's a threshold there in terms of cost. Yep. So if you're in a situation, I remember when I was at the University of Cincinnati, it was a 1-year program. I got a scholarship to go. So I think, I don't know, I was probably $5,000 in debt or something like that getting a master's degree, which is way different from now. I understand that. So, but something like that, if you're in a scenario where you can get it at a low cost, it definitely can pay dividends. But at the same time, if it's going to put you tens of thousands of dollars in debt, it may not be.
Yeah, and I think that just begs the question at that point of what's the paper worth versus what your time is worth, in a sense, right? It will, as you said, will you get your return on investment at that stage? And like I said, I think I would have had I continued in analysis.
Yeah. All right, let's take some calls. Don't be that analyst. And our first caller is Rachel. Rachel, what's your don't be that analyst?
Don't be that analyst who writes a dissertation when a bottom line up front is all that is needed. Know thy audience.
See, I know you're a reader, but I am not. And I definitely fall in the category of, like, I do not want to read War and Peace emails.
Report. No, definitely you got to answer it and be done with it. If there's more needed later, then that would be the time for it. Right? Yeah.
I mean, it is a challenge. It's an art, right? If you're an analyst doing bulletins, there is an art and a science, for that matter, of how you get your bulletins read.
Yeah.
Right. And that, knowing, again, the audience, we're inundated with emails, we're inundated with information, and it's a huge challenge because there's so much competition to get eyeballs on your product.
Yeah, and I think for analysts that are listening, I really would say, like, start consuming some entrepreneurial or business management books in some form, because as I started doing that, what I realized was to know your audience wasn't really like, well, it's police officers. it's not just police officers. What is the problem you're solving for them, right? It really is, it becomes business still at that realm because you are providing a solution, but what is the problem for them you're solving? It really turns out a little differently when you think of it that way.
Very good. And next on the line is Carrie. Carrie, what's your don't be that analyst?
And don't be that analyst that doesn't have a sense of humor. Be willing to deal it right back to them.
Very true. Very true.
And that gets into, I think, the civilian sworn relationship, right? I think when you come into that realm, especially as a civilian, especially maybe as a first-time analyst, the room is already decorated.
Yep.
And you have to understand that, well, why I'm certainly not telling people to put up with harassment. I am just saying that people have a certain way of interacting, have a certain way of joking around, and understand that everything doesn't have to be so serious and there is going to be some clowning around.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, thankfully there's still people behind that curtain too, so definitely I should treat them as such. Oh.
But yeah, I do like their advice to just, you can fight back a little bit. There's nothing wrong with fighting back a little bit. Give it right back to them.
Unless you find yourself on the ground in handcuffs, that's a different story.
yeah. There's always a line not to cross, right?
Yeah.
All right. Next on the line is Jonathan. Jonathan, what's your don't be that analyst?
Don't be that analyst that sends out a bulletin that has nothing but pictures of Sasquatch and like fuzzy blocks on it. If you can't tell what that vehicle is, nobody's going to know what that vehicle is. If that looks like Sasquatch walking through the Pacific Northwest, nobody's going to identify them. Don't be that analyst. Quality over quantity.
Yeah.
Thankfully, in my time, I have not really seen that. The vehicle one, yeah. Sasquatch, no. Vehicle one's it's like a black sedan. That doesn't help at all, does it?
Yeah. You get the ghost too. I've heard analysts talk about the ghost. I think that goes into the idea of a lot of advice you hear out is put color to it, you make it with crayons, whatever it is. And if all you have is text, then all you have is text. Type of thing. But don't shoehorn in a picture that's not going to be helpful.
Yeah. I think it definitely circles back to that aspect of making sure you know your audience, right?
Yeah, definitely. Next on the line is Michael. Michael, what's your don't be that analyst?
Don't be the analyst that has a thin skin that gets offended by everything that's said inside the PD building. Working in law enforcement, you must develop a thick skin regarding topics that are discussed in investigations, patrol, briefings, and anywhere inside the building. So don't be the analyst that's going to be turned off by the fact that you hear something that doesn't pertain to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that gets back to what Carrie was saying in a way, but I think there is a fine line there, right? Again, I'm not suggesting that people put up with harassment. Right.
No, definitely not. And I wonder if he was talking to in terms of, because he talked about the cases that they're working on stuff. And sometimes some things are gory, gruesome. They end up being something that a normal person doesn't get exposed to. Mm-hmm. And so I think to carry it above and beyond just Carrie's aspect that resonates in Michael's stuff is that aspect. You got to know what you're going to be hearing or dealing with. And it might not be pretty sometimes.
Yeah, and look, I think you get inside that world, you're exposed to a lot of that negativity, gruesomeness. You get that warped sense of humor. Yeah. Right. Jokes that you hear inside the office are not going to be told out to the general public. Right.
Yeah, definitely got to be careful of those. Absolutely. I think since you spoke of negativity, one of the things that resonates there with me is if you're going to be in that realm of law enforcement, and one of my professors kind of had said it best because he had seen it so many years ago when I was in college in the late 90s as well, Jason. My first round of schooling, professor had seen several aspects of law from law enforcement to being a prosecutor and a defender as well later on in his careers. But he had mentioned that to keep like I guess, in a sense, I want to call it like to keep your compass pointing a little more true to how the human nature works, right? Law enforcement deals a lot with like that 5% on either end of the spectrum that most of the time you probably will never deal with in regular life. And it can make you very negative. So really kind of stick with going out and like volunteer and be a coach for a kids soccer team. Like do something that continues to show you that people are actually good, right? In general, as opposed to what you're stuck dealing with in overtime, 65 hours a week because you're short staffed and running low on fumes. And, you know, that guy called you this and that person did, you know, so
Have
we
a
know how it
balance.
goes. Yeah. Make sure you just don't stay in the darkness.
Yeah.
To sum that up a little bit more.
Yeah. All right. Our last caller is Patrick. Patrick, what's your don't be that analyst?
Don't be that analyst that makes this fancy spreadsheet with all kinds of confusing data that nobody can read.
That's
sometimes,
good.
Sometimes we're our own worst enemy, right?
Yeah.
But it is frustrating. Sometimes you learn something, either maybe at a training, or maybe you learn something when you watch a YouTube video, or you learn something somewhere, and now you want to implement it.
Right.
And to you, you're excited. This is new. This is going to be great. And it just does not resonate with your audience.
Yep.
And it is so disappointing to have to like the whole excitement, the whole air goes out of the room when you're excited and it just does not hit like you think it's going to.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that goes to an aspect of again, knowing your audience in a sense, right? Like it's great for us as the analysts because like this is so cool, this is what's going to be and do and happen, and we're so I think caught up in the moment of it that we don't realize that it's going to make no sense to anybody else. Or I wish I knew what kind of specific aspect of the spreadsheet he was talking about in that form, but because I'd love to speak to it, but in the general concept, it's great to have a new toy to play with. I think it's the same. I think in terms of civilians, right? I've had officers who come in like, we just ordered this and it's going to be great, and then you see them roll up in like the Bearcat, and you're like, okay, why?
Yeah, no, somebody had a shit you here in the office story where the officer was so excited he wanted to order nighttime goggles to help with their theft from autos issue.
Yep.
And the analyst had to break it to him that most theft from autos happen during the day.
There you go. See, perfect reason to have an analyst. And yeah, they'll absolutely hate you because now they don't get their new toy.
That's true. That's true. All right. So that's Don't Be That Analyst. If you have a Don't Be That Analyst that you want to share on the show, email me at leapodcasts@gmail.com. Run a little bit long here, Nick. This has been fantastic. Let's finish up with words to the world. This is where you can promote any idea that you wish. What are your words to the world?
Yeah, I'll keep it in a sense general, but I think it works especially as we kind of talked about it earlier too with analysts. You know, I'd say stay vigilant and stay focused. Believe in yourself and the what you want to get done, and you'll achieve it. I mean, that really is how our world operates. And with the world being so connected as it is with the internet, I mean, there's a world of distraction and chaos that can suck us in. But, you know, don't let it be proactive, not reactive to it. So do your own search for answers, find the reputable sources, and kind of stay on top of yourself and take care of yourself, and steer clear of all the flashing lights and neon and algorithms that are out there trying to suck you in and away from what should be your goal for yourself at that point.
Very good. Well, I leave every guest with you. You've given me just enough to talk bad about you later.
Perfect.
But I do appreciate you being on the show, Nick. Thank you so much. And you be safe.
Thanks for the invite, Jason. Take care.
Hey Thank you for making it to the end of another episode of Analyst Talk with Jason Elder. You can show your support by sharing this and other episodes found on our website at www.leapodcasts.com. If you have a topic you would like us to cover or have a suggestion for our next guest, please send us an email at leapodcasts@gmail.com. Till next time, analysts, keep talking.